Welcome to a Friday edition of Irish Illustrated Insider. I'm Tim O'Malley with Drew Mentock of Irish Illustrated, and today our podcast has a bit of a singular focus. The transfer portal, that involves a lot, Drew, what Notre Dame brought on board, how those players will help, and actually we'll also delve into the our two opinions, at least, on what might be necessary when that portal reopens in mid-April. And to catch everybody up, Drew, before we kick it to you, I think everybody believes of the eight brought in, Malachi Fields was kind of the gem, the crown jewel of the class. You have Devontae Smith, who I've called the other Devontae Smith until further notice. And of course, crucial players like Jared Dawson and Elijah Hughes up front, Noah Burnett a kicker to replace Mitch Jeter, Will Pauling a wide receiver, and Jalen Stroman, a guy that could start at safety. But you had some thoughts on Fields, I think were really interesting to start with because I had not thought about Fields in this manner until you brought it up.
Yeah, I personally just think he's probably the most potentially talented transfer they've brought in terms of what he can do. In terms of the past production we've seen him do at Virginia, he has back-to-back seasons with over 800 yards. Um, Notre Dame hasn't had an 800-yard receiver, I think, since Kevin Austin. And he kind of disappointed last year too. Like he only got 800 yards at Virginia. And I think, you look at the past transfers Notre Dame's got, and none of them have been a day one or day two pick. I think
Right.
he's the one
That
who I could see being the first guy to kind of go in like the second or third round, like we kind of saw how what Notre Dame's done with some of these bigger bodied but still pretty athletic receivers in the past.
I think that was a great point because like we've kind of bandied about the ideas here and really like is he the best one? We're like, well, Riley Leonard is going to be the best one they brought in, and I kind of made a but you're saying NFL potential for Malachi Fields, the day one or day two. I made a list in Monday Musings, and we're not going to split hairs on the order here, but I think 10 or the 11 the best they've ever brought in during the portal era would be Riley Leonard, Alohi Gilman, who just kind of preceded the portal era, honestly, as Notre Dame fans know, since he wasn't eligible when he should have been. Javante Jean-Baptiste was, I do think he's number three on this list, and he was the biggest surprise in terms of, wow, he's a lot better than I thought. Jordan Clark was better than I thought he was going to be. I think Jack Cohn appreciation years have grown since Jack Cohn left for a couple of the quarterbacks that followed him. Sam Hartman, of course, Sam Hartman was neither a Heisman winner nor was he a bust. Sam Hartman did a good job for Notre Dame, and I think
Yeah.
sometimes people forget that because now the joke is, of course, as we mentioned, he can move into two different postgraduate realms of backup quarterback or model. Nick McLeod was an all ACC player for the one time Notre Dame was in the ACC. He just got hurdled by Najee Harris, so that kind of people kind of remember that. Skoranek, I thought was fantastic. Thomas Harper, even though he had a weird exit for Notre Dame by just not showing up one day for Sun Bowl practices, he would have shown up if it was playoff practices, though. Drew, that was a Sun Bowl situation for him, and of course, Mitch Jeter, Jaden Harrison are playoff heroes for Notre Dame. So none of those guys, though. Great point, are day one options. Day two, not even day two options. In a perfect world, as our publisher, excuse me, our producer Jack Freeman said, Riley Leonard could have been in a perfect world back in the day, but that was why he came to Notre Dame, and he will not be day one or day two.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I guess Riley Leonard had some like maybe first round buzz. Brandon Joseph, I guess, kind of did, but that was never seemed very
Yeah,
because he had so many interceptions, but I don't think that seemed realistic. It would hard. He went undrafted. He kind of, I think, has been on and off the Lions roster. It's very hard to see that being like with Malachi Fields, in my opinion, because he has the production and then he has like, I mean, I'm a little dubious of Bruce Feldman's freak list just in terms of because that's information coming from the personnel staff and stuff, but it says he ran, his vertical leap was over 38 inches. I believe he ran 22 miles an hour on the GPS. Like it seems like he's a guy who's actually probably going to test better than they think he is, whereas maybe he gets people view him as a bigger receiver, but I think he's actually pretty athletic as well.
and he tested well against Notre Dame on the field. I mean, when
Right.
Malachi Fields left that game, we thought that guy would help Notre Dame. And we do that all the time. And it actually worked out for once where we point out somebody in a joking film review or a Monday Musings or one of our columns, like, hey, that guy's, there is no Markinson. They could get in the transfer portal here and get a hold of Malachi Fields. Fields, we're going to segue here because Fields is not on campus for the spring and, of course, ended his season injured. It does matter to me that Fields is not on campus this spring. I think I learned a little bit from Riley Leonard not being able to throw to his new receivers last spring. Sam Hartman actually, with the offense changing when he came, Sam Hartman mentioned in retrospect it was very difficult for him to learn the offense. And there's not a new offense, but it's new quarterbacks. So I think it could hurt that Fields isn't here, but Will Pauling is. And I want to get your thoughts on Pauling. He is one of the guys that unsolicited when I asked the 8 site writers from the 8 programs that Notre Dame gleaned its transfer portal roster this year. They mentioned Will Pauling is going to be a good locker room guy too, and he can be a guy that if there's a better passer than they had at Wisconsin, he can be a number one, not a traditional real number one, but you like to hear that because he really just has to be a number four at Notre Dame, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Fields or Greathouse, Fields, Faison, and Will Pauling. I think that would be a kind of a goal to have Pauling to fit that bill.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back to if you go back 2 seasons in 2023 at Wisconsin, I mean, he had more, he had 74 catches for 837 yards and 6 touchdowns. Technically, if you're just looking at raw numbers, those are even better than what Fields did slightly in either of the last 2 seasons. So he's a guy who has proven that he can be really productive when he's given the chance. I am curious. I mean, it's really helpful that you have a guy like Fields because then you're looking at three kind of under smaller receivers. He's not the biggest guy,
Yeah.
um, but and he seems like he mostly is lined up in the slot. So I'd be kind of curious if he has can have any flexibility with that when he gets or
Right.
he's on campus. But it's encouraging. I mean, he had his best season under Mike Brown. He's coming back to being with Mike Brown, who was at Wisconsin in 2023. So he's definitely intriguing. And again, you know you're losing a lot of receivers, and you bring in an experienced guy who's, I mean, been more productive than any of the guys they just had leave too. So
I feel like ND's on an endless loop of, well, he's probably best suited for the slot, but we got to see where else he can play because
yeah,
now they have Greathouse in that situation. I used to say that about Jaden Thomas. Jordan Faison, of course, seemed like a forever slot receiver, and then all of a sudden we look out there and he's playing the X, and that's where he played
yeah.
during the season as well. So you do need versatility there, of course. Fields, though, is that boundary guy that comes in kind of like I think more hyped, of course, than Bo Collins last year. It can help in the running game too, but he can make big plays downfield, and that just I hate to say Notre Dame didn't have receivers to make big plays downfield last year because you saw them at the end with Greathouse and Leonard. The offense just didn't go that way. But yeah, if Pauling can cut the defenses up, I think that's a huge help for CJ Carr or Steve Angeli. Biggest surprise would be if it's Kenny Minchie, of course. I wrote down guys that must start were Fields, obviously Noah Burnett better work out as a starter as a starting kicker, but and then Devontae Smith and Jared Dawson. I don't know if it's true Jared Dawson must start, but Jared Dawson must play a larger role than Notre Dame's third guy who played last year when everybody was healthy. In other words, Heinisch and Gabriel Rubio played massive roles on the team, but if Cross and Mills were healthy all year, I don't think they would have taken too many snaps for them other than regular rotation. I think Dawson comes from a rotating situation at Louisville where if you could have Dawson, Rubio, Heinisch, maybe Jason Onye, as there's some stuff breaking out on. I haven't read it, but I think to give credit, it was Rise and Draft. Ryan Roberts mentioned Onye might be coming back with the team, and now he has a long road back, of course. But I think Jared Dawson has to be what you consider a rotational starter. Do you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I mean that's the position group where you need to get the most bodies in, I think, to have them be successful. I mean, we even saw, I mean, I know Howard Cross was injured too, but also you were just asking a lot out of him consistently to like hold up. And I think the, even if they don't have those kind of like, high level All-American type defensive tackles next year, if you can rotate guys in and keep them fresh, I think that's pretty pivotal. And I think Dawson might be the most talented like pass rusher they have, and he's a bigger body. Like he's not. I mean, he's not Riley Mills, but he's also not a guy like I'm looking at like Donovan Heinisch or something like that. So you need a different mix of bodies for different teams that might be bigger too. So I definitely think it would be a little concerning if he's not
Yeah, that's
heavily rotated. Like if we're seeing him get kind of pushed aside in the spring or something, that might be concerning.
I think Devontae Smith, of course, I believe they brought in Devontae Smith to be the starting nickel, and I'm trusting Mike Mickens on this one because he's perfect so far. Thomas Harper was very good. Jordan Clark was even better, better than I thought he would be. Mickens developed Tariq Bracy. I think Notre Dame fans might forget how much they did not like Tariq Bracy earlier in his career for getting burned. He was beaten. The 2020 game at Clemson, he had to be replaced. There's a reason Clarence Lewis was Notre Dame's freshman starter. Just seems crazy when you look at Tariq Bracy the next 2 years when he carved his niche there as a senior and a fifth year senior. The nickel is absolutely instrumental in Al Golden's defense. It will be in Chris Ash's defense too, because that's the way football is played. I asked, I almost say James Laurinaitis every time I say Max Bulla's name. At some point, I'm going to stop that. I asked Max Bulla because he's a linebacker and he just feels like a linebacker when you talk to him. He's one of the best coaches to talk to on that staff. He's so passionate about it. You have enough linebackers here. Could the base be a 4-3? And he's like, that's not football. He said he's like the nickel now is football. So Devontae Smith has to become that player because senior year Devontae Smith is much different than a backup corner like Carson Hobbs.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I mean, he has some experience. Like he, played a lot more last year after, finally not being healthy. I didn't realize, like, on Notre Dame's roster, he's listed at 5'11", 191 pounds. He honestly, I thought he was bigger than that. Like
I did too.
like
Yeah.
he's actually more similar to like Thomas Harper or
Right.
Jordan Clark in size, but he doesn't look like that on the field, which I feel like is significant too, especially if they can get more out of him. But there's times where you look at Jordan Clark, you're like, man, I'm surprised he was able to hold up in that way. And I don't feel the same way when I watch Devontae Smith. And I feel like if Mickens can get him to go up another level like he did those other two guys, I mean, Jordan Clark took, I mean, I think he might get drafted now, which is
Yeah, which
not
is
like guaranteed, but it's just crazy. Like if he can get a similar type of development out of Devontae Smith, like he could be the best nickel they've had, and I think there's a lot more they could do with him if that's the case.
And I think you make a point that Priester brings up a lot. Tim Priester brings up a lot of not all 5'11", 192 is the same. Like someone will be always look at me like, well, he's the exact same size as Drew Tranquil. He's the exact same size as this guy. No, he's not. It's just there's something different about the wings. There's something different about the way Devontae Smith carries himself. And Jordan Clark, to his credit, like he looks so small in interviews and on in the practice field. Then the game would start, he'd make a play, and after a while, you stop thinking, "Wow, I'm surprised he made that play," because
Yeah.
he just played physically to a way we never thought he could. The interesting one for me is because there's a spot open right up, and I think we've talked about this in the past. When you lose Xavier Watts, Jalen Stroman's not replacing Xavier Watts, and neither is Adon Schuler. Adon Schuler just has to become a better version of Adon Schuler. Watts was a genius playing safety last season. That's why he was even so much better than when he won the Nagurski Award. Stroman will be coming in, and he'll be battling it out with Luke Talich and Kennedy Urlacher, maybe Tay Johnson. I don't know how it works for a guy that had to learn Al Golden's defense at corner, and now he has to learn Chris Ash's defense at safety. But Stroman's a guy that, again, when healthy, I think is a guy that projects to at least rotational starter. Otherwise, it would be a miss.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when doing like some research on him, I think the biggest key is like he has a lot more experience in the past playing different safety positions. Like I think it was 2 years ago, he played over 100 snaps, like at free safety, lined up in the box, and at the slot. And like the only guy on Notre Dame's roster, I think this year who could say that is Xavier Watts. So at least if you look at like a guy you can kind of move all around the field and fill in for different guys and stuff like that. I'm not saying he's going to be Xavier Watts, but at least you have somebody who's like, okay, I know this guy at the back end I can bring up if I need to. I can have him cover the tight end here. Like we can put him back if we're, adjusting our defense a little bit. I think you need a guy you can do these different roles, especially when you're bringing in more or expecting younger players to kind of fill those losses of a guy like Xavier Watts. At least you have a guy you can rely on to do different things.
And another Mickens eval involved here, of course. And Chris Ash is kind of, well, it's not his niche. He's a safeties coach when he's not defensive coordinator or head coach. That's what Chris Ash has done. He coaches defensive backfields. So that will be interesting to see how he fits in that scheme. The guy I wrote down that is, I'm going to skip over a niche role player because he might be more than that. I wrote down Elijah Hughes as a support player. I think Elijah Hughes helping the defensive. If you find out that Elijah Hughes comes in from USC, he is a true junior. He's actually has 2 years of eligibility left. He did burn freshman and sophomore year. If Elijah Hughes comes in and you're like, you know what? I think they have to get him on the field too for 10 to 12 snaps. Not in the way where can Mook and Savellano help you for 1 snap like we were doing at the end of last season. But if Elijah Hughes is one of those guys like, wow, he's a spot in this defense too, that would really make the whole greater than the sum of the parts in the defensive tackle room.
Yeah, definitely. I'm kind of curious to see what they can get out of him. Like he each of the last
Undersized, right?
season. Yeah. And he added, in looking at it, like he added like 20 pounds or something prior to last season. So that was his first time going from like, I think he was kind of an in-between guy at like
Yeah.
270 as a freshman. And then they like got him fully up to like in the 290s. Um, but he spent each of the last 2 years, he wouldn't play at the start of the season. And then all of a sudden they were using him again by the end. Um, and so I'm kind of curious, clearly he would prove himself at some point, or they had guys transfer out against this
Right.
year.
Right. Right.
Brett got hurt, but um, yeah, he's kind of a wild card for me. I agree. Like, I'm really curious to see what he does because I'm not going to be surprised if he has like a decent role and is making plays, and I guess it'd be also less concerning and less surprising if he kind of got beaten out by other guys too.
Right. It's not like Dawson getting not working out.
Right.
Actually, it just occurred to me too, and this is not an answer that Al Washington would ever give because you don't say this about players until about December of next year. He could be a long-term guy for Notre Dame. Is there a chance he would help them for 4 games and then the playoff run, and then he has 2 more years of eligibility to be at Notre Dame too? Because you haven't recruited defensive tackle wonderfully well. He could be a long-term person at Notre Dame if it's not. Now, I don't think that's the sales pitch that they brought in for Elijah Hughes. Come get your year of eligibility back at Notre Dame and we'll play in the playoffs. But yeah, if it doesn't work out well, he could be a long-term solution. And, patience is, of course, not only a virtue, but impossible in college football these days with the portal. But he is not the absolute must hit. And I think he's really the only one that is not a must hit because now we go to the one that surprised everybody in Ty Washington. Well, Ty Washington, even if his niche was blocking, just became a must hit because Cooper Flanagan probably will not play in 2025 with an Achilles injury. That leaves Eli Raridan, Jack Larson. Kevin Bauman is on the roster, but Kevin Bauman has had many, many injuries, and I don't know if Kevin Bauman can play more than his niche role or he could probably elevate his niche role from last year. And then you're just looking at Flanagan coming in, and that's not a position where you want to rely on undersized Lawson and Flanagan coming in. So Washington just jumped into a crew where they need Ty Washington to hit.
Yeah, and um, I think Flanagan's also not coming into the summer too, so you're
Right,
not
right.
gonna
That hurts too.
even
Yeah.
know what I mean, I think when I reviewed him, I looked at him kind of as like, oh, I see like a little bit of Michael Mayer there. Not that he is Michael Mayer, but you're either way, you're not gonna know it until over the
Yeah.
summer, the
Yeah.
fall camp. So there, yeah, I think definitely the most interesting guy because of how his tenure at Arkansas ended too. Um, and it kind of sounds like there was some poor communication there. Like he's talked about it at least and been pretty open about what happened. But yeah, he's a guy that I think people were surprised when they took a tight end.
Right.
Uh, but I think he's a guy
Really
they,
shouldn't have been.
yeah,
Yeah.
they took and I think he definitely has potential when he's played. I think he's shown he can do some stuff, but then you're also like, well, why wasn't he playing more often the whole time too? But
There is,
Arkansas had good tight ends. I should clarify that too. Like,
yeah, they no, they did. They kind of recruited over him, and it worked out. I mean, they
yeah,
did really good. Who was the player they brought in as a freshman when he was a sophomore that ended up being is it Latz? I don't know.
one in the
Luke has.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
there's another guy tight ended in the Senior Bowl, I think, over the weekend too. So they had two tight ends that were pretty prominent.
Without getting to his full story, if people go to Irish Illustrated, they should still be able to find it. It's called Insider's Review instead of Preview. We could always Google it. Insider's Review, Notre Dame's Portal Editions. Danny West of our Arkansas site he included a link where Ty Washington gives an interview and talks about kind of what went down in Arkansas. But I brought this up to you guys off the air. I did not ask any of the writers if they would fit at Notre Dame. I did say, is there any anecdote? I asked for strengths, weaknesses, and an anecdote our fans might like, and everybody included them. But unsolicited, Pauling, Fields, Dawson, and Washington were mentioned as they are going to fit in great at Notre Dame as teammates. The Dawson comment was he's used to rotating. He's a very unselfish player. Louisville heavily rotated. His best game was against Notre Dame, by the way. Um, Fields is I mean, Jackie from our Wahoo's 24/7 site just loved Fields. She said he's a local guy that, I mean, he like stayed entrenched in the community when he was there. They love Malachi Fields. Pauling was a team first guy at Wisconsin, and he said a team first guy that kind of quote unquote quit. He said Ty Washington is that type of player. Like all the dealings he's ever had with him, he's been was a great kid to get to know. So I think that is a big deal for Freeman and why when they bring a guy in, they know he have to fit. He's been pretty good with it. I mean, Riley Leonard's obviously number one of all time. And for all the jokes we make as media about Sam Hartman, the players love Sam Hartman. Like I think it's
Yeah.
important. We always make our jokes about Sam Hartman. The players love Sam Hartman. So Freeman's done a really good job at that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the only one I'm thinking that like maybe just didn't work out was Caleb Smith, and then they kind
Yeah.
of figured out that pretty quickly. Like he
Right.
wasn't even around for the fall. So yeah, I don't think feel like they brought in guys. And I mean, I listened to that Washington interview he did. Um, and obviously you're not getting both sides
No,
when you
of
listen
course,
to him
yeah.
talk. But it wasn't, I mean, he seemed pretty aware of his shortcomings and that he made a mistake, but he also was like reaching out. I mean, I think the story is essentially like he was asked to go in late in a game in a blowout, but his grandma had just gotten ill like that week, and wasn't ready to go in, and he kind of said he didn't want to initially, and then walked it back, but it was too late, and then he
Yeah.
was like, let go of the team is kind of how he tells it. But he was very upfront. He's like, I shouldn't have done that, and I've been telling them I need help. I'm not in a good place mentally right now. So like still not the best situation, but I feel like if you're Marcus Freeman and like the Notre Dame coaching staff, you can at least see like at least when you speak to him, he sounds willing to like work on the things he needs to and be and communicate in an effective way. And that's a lot better than a guy who's just like, man, they screwed me. Like,
Yeah, they screwed me. I don't want to talk about it. It didn't work out.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. I didn't mention Eli Raridon, I don't think, when I listed tight ends, but that was the given that Eli Raridon is given as the starter. I want to make sure people realize I didn't miss Eli Raridon in the first place. We want to segue now to what every message board fan and analyst likes to do, tell Notre Dame what they need going forward. Uh, in the transfer portal, the window does open again April 16th to 25th, which is convenient. That is it's 4 days after the Blue Gold game, 9-day window. Um, this is pre-attrition. We have to talk how the current roster is constructed here, Drew, because it's college football, and we should point out that right before we started this does not count as an Irish Illustrated Insider podcast curse because we found this out before we started filming. But James Blanchard will not be coming to Notre Dame as the new general manager. That news broke just prior. I contend, and we'll get into that a little bit. I contend that I know there is no rush, but I feel like the new GM should be on staff, if not the outset of the spring, heavily into the spring to evaluate the roster because you're going to have 105 players. There's about 94, 95 scholarship players now, but you have walk-ons that are better than scholarship players. There always are. You have to cut some walk-ons from the team. It sounds really harsh. I use the word cut jokingly sometimes. You are cutting people now because they have more than 105 contributing players. You need your general manager to help with that roster. I think that is kind of the quote unquote deadline, and a recruiting coordinator can handle stuff from February until a new GM is hired.
Definitely. And also I think too, I mean, however, whatever you want to call it, tampering, just kind of finding out what's going on. But that's about when too you're getting a sense of, guys at other schools are going through their
Right.
springs, and you're getting it. They're going to be starting to make those decisions if they're going to leave too. So you need somebody on the ground, kind of reaching out to people, getting a sense of who might be available and who we need to start evaluating. You can't wait until because it's only open for like a week or so.
Yeah, it's 8, 9 days.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
something
you
like
got to
that.
be ready to hit the ground running, and that process needs to start sooner. But I think you're right that it's not right now is an okay period of time. I don't know when spring practices starts at other schools, but it hasn't started yet.
Yeah,
And
it's late for
either
Notre
way,
Dame this year. That March 18th
yeah,
range is pretty late, or I should say it's condensed. I don't think March 18th is late, but you would expect them to go farther than the 12th. March 18th isn't late, but it's usually
yeah.
18th goes all the way to April 24th or something like that.
Yeah, and I feel like sometimes like that's right after spring break. I feel like sometimes Brian Kelly would have one at the start or right before spring break, and then
It
they would
was.
take that
Yeah.
off. So yeah, you're right. It's not really delaying the start by much because that one first day doesn't really mean anything anyways.
It's a great point that when you have to start looking at other rosters because we were kind of we all speculated Prince Collie might be leaving in the spring when he wasn't getting any action. And then there's like, oh, he's injured. And you're like, oh, that seems a little weird. He knew he was leaving. Like Notre Dame knew Prince
Uh,
Collie was leaving, and he was a pseudo participant in the spring. So every school has those. Like Logan Diggs, I know he waited, but he was leaving before that blue gold game started. Lorenzo Styles, it kind of broke right before the blue gold game started that he moved to corner, and then they said no, he's not moving to corner, and turns out he worked out at corner for the national champions. So that's
yeah,
unfortunate. And at quarterback, we're going to get in every position here. Tyler Buckner knew he was leaving before that blue goal game, and somebody on this roster at quarterback is going to leave because they're not going to have four scholarship guys. Three, it won't be Blake Herbert. It won't be Blake Herbert. He's
yeah.
not going to take off. But someone on this scholarship roster is not going to be one or two, and I think they're going to leave. But you can't plan for that position like you can for others. I believe tight end and defensive tackle still are important positions to bring in. Do you have any argument to the contrary, or do you have one that thinks a greater need than those for this roster?
No, I mean, I think t defensive tackle, I guess unfortunately from Notre Dame's perspective, is still the biggest need, even after bringing in two guys like they missed on some of their higher end
Yeah.
targets in that capacity. And even if it's just bringing in another guy like Hughes, who maybe has some upside, like it's pro as long as the guy's a cultural fit, it's probably worth even taking some chances on a guy in the portal to get extra bodies and hopefully hit. Like you would rather have a proven guy, but I think they might be at the point where they just need extra bodies with potential there.
Right now, someone's getting mad that we're talking about this because they want Mukum and Sevillano to develop and play, and I totally get it. But I want to point out that in the 16 game run by Notre Dame, and your goal is you better have a goal to play at least 14 nowadays, as your Marcus Freeman. They lost Howard Cross twice, beginning in, well, they would have lost him three times if it wasn't a playoff game because he would not have been playing in those last two games. So they lost Howard Cross two and a half times. They lost Riley Mills for an extended period at the end. They lost Jason Oney to personal reasons for 2 months. They lost Gabriel Rubio for the first 5 or 6 games. Donovan Heinisch played it, as you pointed out in our rankings. Donovan Heinisch did yeoman's work playing there, made it through. So you lost your top four because Heinisch was arguably number five coming to the year. You lost your top four for a stretch. That's why I think you need, I keep saying the name Chris Smith from Harvard. They brought in Chris Smith during
Yeah.
the middle of the, you need Chris Smith and not Chris Smith light. I think it's Chris Smith plus is what I think is a realistic goal for Notre Dame to scour college football and try to bring in. And as you pointed out, he would be that type is a cultural fit too.
Yeah, Notre Dame has shown they're willing to play young guys under Marcus Freeman,
Yeah,
so would have played him, and they still like they could bring in another guy, but if they think Mookum's ready for some role, I would they might still get him on the field for 5 or 10 snaps on occasion. Like he bringing in another guy doesn't mean like oh they're shutting the door on these young guys. It's just
yeah,
giving you options if those guys don't hit. Like if Mookum still isn't ready, he doesn't go to that next level. You can't be like, oh well, we wanted to give him a chance and now we have no other better options. Like that's
yeah.
not a good perspective to take.
I think those days are gone at Notre Dame. We want to give
Yeah,
a chance, and it didn't work out. That Marcus Freeman has brought that. And I want to point out, this is going to sound weird. I had a great conversation on Twitter with someone who disagreed with my take on bringing in a defensive tackle. If you're Mukum and Sevillano, you can beat out the guy they bring in.
right.
That's allowed. You're allowed to bring out to beat out people. It's not like the Riley Leonard situation or Sam Hartman where realistically the quarterback did not have a chance to beat him out. If you're good, you're getting 12 snaps. That will work out for you.
Yeah.
Tight end, I think we started talking about, but I just think they might need a tight end's an attrition heavy position too because they play special teams. Like Kevin Bauman, Davis Sherwood played 200 snaps on special teams. He's gone. You need some guy. You might need a tight end coming in too to help.
Yeah, that's definitely Yeah, that's definitely when I could see them it be kind of well, like seem weird that Notre Dame of all places takes
Right.
two transfer tight ends in an off season, but I mean you're right. They still rely so heavily on the tight end that they're kind of in a point where any additional attrition would potentially put them in a bad spot. And they really again, it's to a degree, you have to prepare for things to go wrong. Notre Dame got to the national championship last year because they were able to sustain it in an inordinate amount of injuries. They can't do that and then be like, well, we're going to assume we're healthy again this fall. Like that wouldn't really track. So I think you're right that that's something they have to be on the lookout for. It's always tough, like when thinking about what they need to target, because it's so hard to know what's available, which again goes back to like why you need to have somebody like kind of with their ear to the ground figuring that out. But I think if they could find a fit who can have a role, even if somebody maybe with a little more experience as a pass catching tight end, which is maybe
Right.
the thing that they're probably lacking right now, like that could be a role that really helps them in that room.
I'll quickly talk about, and also Eli Raridon needs to get off of special teams now. You need to have Eli Raridon's just stay healthy for your most snaps at tight end. Quickly, Marty Biaggi, if he needs a punter or a kicker, will go get one that is in the preferred walk-on ranks, the Ivies. He'll find someone he needs. So I don't think us speculating there. Eric Schmidt coming in, of course, to help out uh, Rendell and Burnett. Defensive backfield, I think there's nine safeties and corners, and they're well tiered, and I just don't think you're finding anybody that's going to help. I think Mickens and Ash are going to find young players from their freshman and redshirt freshman classes that help there. So I think that's out. Linebacker is if you lose one, then you start wondering because that's heavy. But there's I think they like Teddy Rizak a lot more than maybe the standard Notre Dame fan did last year. They would have played him all year on special teams if it wasn't so obvious that for his frame he needed a red shirt. So I don't think a linebacker comes in. I think the best news is that Jalen Sneed stayed with Notre Dame and Preston Zinter. Those were the two. If you're gonna throw names out there, those are the two guys you thought might transfer. Nobody else. You didn't think those main guys were gonna transfer.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would agree. I think had you lost one or both of those, especially, that might be something you have to consider. But with that, and with the recruiting class they had, just bringing in like Madden Framo too, like
Right.
I feel like you
And
you
he's here. And
yeah,
he's
and
here.
he's here, so you can see. But I think that's such a talented room. Like they bring in a top five or so linebacker every year at this point. So that's a place that they've recruited really well, and I would be surprised to see them go there.
As I mentioned, quarterback is wait and see, and then you're not going to. I don't know how you convince a running back or an offensive lineman to come to Notre Dame right now, but I do think we should point it out before we wrap this up that six running backs in the room, all here at the time. Jabron Payne coming back from injury. Dylan McCullough leaves. Four of these guys could start for sure somewhere. I cannot imagine one person doesn't leave. I hate to say it because Keaton Young's like we just talked about on our podcast Thursday. Keaton Young was like everybody wants to see Keaton Young star this spring. Well, Aeneas Williams and Jadarian Price are awfully good, and there's the untouchable too in Jeremiah Love. So I don't think you're ever bringing in a running back because how are you going to convince a running back? Well, we lost one. You want to come back up Price, Williams, and Love and Young? I just said them all there, but that's a tough sell. I don't think that could happen, but I would be surprised if there's not attrition from, as I said, quarterback, but also the running backs room naturally.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, I mean, we both talked to Dylan McCullough a decent amount over the years. Like he's such a, I guess, charismatic personality
Yes,
and
yes,
somebody who really I feel like he's always put those running backs first in terms of like, I mean, I remember talking to Jeremiah Love in high school, and the pitch was always like, you're going to come here and you're not going to run the ball a lot. Like, we want to take care of your body for the next. Like,
it's amazing, really,
he's
that it
done
works
that
that
with
way.
Price. Like, we didn't want to put too much after the Achilles. We were not like, yeah, if he had stayed, maybe I could have seen
Right.
him keeping everybody because he is like that, but it's hard. Even if the new guy coming in isn't great, like he's not going to have that relationship with those players. So I agree that
It's it's worth noting though that these guys can't follow him. They can't just take it unless Jeremiah Love can follow him to Vegas, probably it'd work out just
yeah.
fine for him, but nobody else can follow him off to Las Vegas. So that is it for our Portal Edition podcast. With the not a jinx, Jack Freeman and Drew Mentock, not a jinx, but James Blanchard was announced. We did get to speak about it. We will have a lot more on James Blanchard's situation or not coming to Notre Dame. The GM search, I don't think it's going to be a huge rush. We talked about that a little, but we'll be back for our standard Irish Illustrated podcast on Monday. Until then, thanks for joining us. For Drew Mentock, I'm Tim O'Malley. Thanks for listening.